Right, because YouTube's a wanker and keeps crunching up my videos, I thought I'd do another video on this bolt. I finished all the work yesterday, but the spring I put in here, I thought it'd be enough to bump the power up to where the customer wants it, and it's not quite. So I've ripped it apart again so I can do it. But a lot of people ask me about bolts, and I get a hell of a lot of fucking bolts to work on, so I figured, well, fuck it, let's actually do a useful video for you guys. Obviously, in my videos, I don't say things in a technical way that I barely understand. I will make sure I put the information out there to you guys in a way that is easy to understand. So for the people that often comment in my videos, and I appreciate what you're saying, I might not be saying, oh, if you do it this way, and you have to explain the amount of amps and Cs, and here's a chart and a graph that I made, here's a link to a complete breakdown of the mathematical equation. No, I'm dyspraxic as all fuck, I don't understand that shit, alright? I just know what I do with the guns to make them go. Bolt tell you to use a 15C. Now, I know that a 15C, if you're running something that's going to have a naturally very high amp draw, a 15C might not do it. Best way to think about this, if you're using a high torque motor and you run a 7.4 battery, and it's, no matter how high the C rating, you'll find your battery does get a bit warm because you need the volts there to make the motor do what it wants to do. And the C rating is how fast the battery discharges. If the volts aren't there, then the C rating matters not because the volts aren't there. And the motor requires both things. Now, if it was just down to amps, if the amps is the only thing that matters, you could run your guns on fucking 3 volts. The amps do matter, the C rate and the discharge rate does matter, but the volts matter as well. So if you're going to run a high torque motor, you are going to get better performance out of an 11.1 LiPo. Now, because this is modified, this is there's not a lot inside of this bolt anymore. The piston is bolts. I think that's probably the bushings are bolts. I think that's probably it on the inside. Now, I didn't do the work to this gun. I simply got it because it wasn't working properly, and so I am unfucking it basically. So at this point in time, a 15C11.1 might not do it. Might not do it. You might want to use a 25C. I am not really one for 30Cs. A 25C might be better because it does have a high torque motor in there, and it does have the Titan in here, which means it's going to be doing more things, so you might want more Cs. Basically, when you're firing the gun, if you feel your battery is getting really hot really quickly, you might find that there's just not enough Cs there, and that is why it's doing it. But it could also be there's not enough volts there, and that might be doing it. And just a little thing, a lot of guns get very warm when you fire them. Brushed motors tend to get warm, they do. And depending on the motor, depending on the build, and I've seen this so many times, people say if your motor's getting hot, if your battery's getting hot, then it is because of the shimming and the way the motor's sat. But that just isn't true, because you hold the motor like this between 2 fingers and you pulse the trigger, zap, 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 and let it go zim, 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 it's gonna get warm. And that's with no load, all right? Certain motors get hotter than other motors, and that's just the way it is. And sometimes if you're using a 7.4 LiPo, it doesn't get warm at all. You use 11.1, it does. You might be using a 15C 11.1, battery gets very warm very quickly. You could be using a 30C and the battery doesn't. Now, not every gun has got a Titan in it. Not every gun can very quickly and easily tell you how many amps, how many currents, how many sultanas, all this stuff. You might not have that ability in there to check. And again, I've never fitted a Titan just to find out exactly what the amp draw is and how many microseconds of that. Because, you know, Titans are not the be-all and end-all. The fact of the matter is, most airsoft guns don't come with all that shit on the inside, and the gun just works. So, even the noob rolls, you know, they are pretty much the most basic, bog standard, awful things you can get, but they still at least work, you know? So, have your stats, have your statistics, go mad, you want to count your amps, fine. Best thing you can do is have an array of batteries and see which battery makes the gearbox cycle the quietest, cycle the smoothest, cycle the fastest without any kind of double taps on semi or misfires, without the motor getting too hot, and without the battery and wires getting too hot. Have an array of batteries. The only reason I keep 11115Cs in stock is because not many places stock them, but dependent on the build, you may want that battery. Okay? Leave that there. Those are the facts. Anyone who wants to comment on all that stats and statistics and fucking weasels, in the comments, go mad. Go mad. Go mad. I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to it because I'm giving the information in a way that people understand. But you don't need to understand maths to know, oh, battery's getting a bit warm, I might up the Cs. Oh, gun's double tapping in semi-auto, no matter what settings I put on the Titan, might want to drop the Cs. Alright, just saying. Always good to have options, get an array of batteries. What I'm doing in this video is for the people that run bolts or want to run a bolt and want an option that isn't a TM recoil. Yeah. I'm going to go through pros and cons, and then I'm going to crack open an ENC for the same customer, and I do like an ENC. The Bolt gearbox, there's a couple of faults with it. First things first, the bushings. As you can see, a couple of bushings have been changed. I think that's either been changed or modified, but that sits nice and tight. This one here is an original. You can see these bushings are not moving left or right or anything like that inside the shell. A lot of bolts, now that one here, you can see that's a different bushing to the one that's on this side. Now that's not a terrible thing. That is because sometimes the back of the bushings are a little bit higher or lower, and to get the best shimming on the gun, you'll want to make sure that you can drop a gear as low as possible or as high as possible to get to where you want the shimming. That does happen. If it's a solid bushing, it doesn't matter between the brands. It also doesn't matter if you put a bearing bushing on the bevel gear and leave these two as solid. I would never use a bearing bushing of any kind on a bolt up here and here, because it's not going to like it, it's not going to take it, they're going to go bang. You will see that in a lot of cases, these bushings move left and right inside the gearbox casing. And yes, in a lot of cases, if you want to glue in a solid bushing, up to you. I don't do it, I don't like it. But sometimes, like with the bolts, they are quite loose. But even if you glue them, because they're moving left and right, they're going to come undone again. You could use some really fucking tough glue in that, but obviously if it starts rattling around, which it will with this recoil assembly, it's probably still going to come loose. That creates noise inside a bolt. There's not a lot you can do about it. The gearbox casing. They are basically identical to LCT. If you look at an LCT gearbox casing on a V2, they look exactly the fucking same. I don't know this for a fact. I'm pretty sure they come from the same factory. They've got this bit and this bit. It's got the same little markings on it, and I do feel it's the same. And it's just a weird thing, nah. But I've not really seen the front of the gearbox cases crack on these. I've seen a couple, but I've done a fucking hell of a lot of these. That's not normally the fault. Let's crack it open, we'll go inside and we'll have a look at that. Now it's worth bearing in mind that when you get inside this, why am I doing it the slow way? Now this is something I do like about the bolt. Check this out. Where there's a recoil part, which is here, this rod sits that way round, so it's springy, and the shorter end what goes in first, alright? Because of that, it has to run all the way into the gearbox. Most spring guides have got a bolt in the middle, so you can only get your screwdriver in there sort of that much to hold it in place if you need to. Obviously with a bolt, that's beautiful. I'm now right the way in there, and I can pop this open easily without everything coming flying out. Let's pop that out. Now this has got a max spring guide. I think this is the only thing that Max makes that I believe to be a worthwhile investment. The adjustable trigger I don't see as a worthwhile investment because I don't. It just causes more problems than not, and you could just put a grub screw in your gearbox casing and get the same fucking thing for half a penny. So, meh. But that is a good spring guide. I like these, and as far as I'm aware, you can use these in most V2s, and you can have that same appeal. So that is good. That is not the spring that I wanted to put in there. I need a bigger spring. Now bear in mind that I didn't do any of the work inside here. I've not adjusted the shimming because there's nothing wrong with the shimming. We could spend hours trying to make this gun fire silently, but these are not the original gears. 2 of the bushings are not original, and it fired as quiet as I'd expect a well-built Bolt to fire. So these are rocket gears. They seem to be standing up fine, so that's why I've left them in there. I would prefer to leave these 2 gears as bolts because they're really chunky, they're really tough. Now the customer wants to keep a really heavy piston. Now normally with a bolt, you would find that this gear here is obviously a lot torquey. I think they're 32-to-1 possibly. And for that reason, they use a half rack piston. Now, if you've got a half rack piston, you probably want to use the correct gears with it. But this has got these gears in, so you probably want to use the correct piston. But these pistons are fucking tough. They really, really, really are tough. I had one the day that obviously was deformed. This one is the piston that came in it, and it is the same as the normal MP5 piston, which is there, but there are some machining differences on it. This is the newer ones, that's the older one. Now what I've done here is I have changed out the cylinder head. With the bolts, there is a lot of forward force because the recoil on it is very, very, very hard, and it does cause the gun to do things you wouldn't normally expect. Now you need to understand, if you buy a gun with recoil in it, you're going to have it serviced a bit more frequently. You have to keep your screws tightened. But I have changed out, inside here, the cylinder head to one with a very hard rubber pad. You can buy these pads places, they're not a lot of money. You can get these cylinder heads with the pads already installed, but my pads are a lot tougher. They are really, really hard, they're not soft. You don't want a soft pad inside it because the soft pad, when the piston is compressed, you know, you can't get a good judge on what your AOE is like, you can't get a good judge on anything really, and it means things might not line up properly when you think they are lining up properly, because you can't see the full force of the piston impacting on that head when the gearbox is closed. And that's the only time you're really going to see, obviously it's inside your cylinder, you can't see what it's doing, it's common sense, so big hard pad. What you can also do is spacers. These nylon spacers here, if you've got, so I know I put 2 inside it. Now if you're using the original Bolt gears, then you might find that you have to use a big padded head like that, and possibly 1 spacer on here to give it the correct amount of AOE adjustment. Now AOE is not something that I really think matters too much in 99% of cases, unless it's a 249 or 60 made by Classic Army, A&K, Spetzler Arms. All these have terrible AOE and they chew up their fucking pistons something fierce. And that's pretty much the only gun, aside from bolts, where you do have to look after that AOE. Somebody in one of the Facebook Bolt groups said, oh, what does that mean about the AOE? And basically, when these are built, without any kind of correction, the teeth are really catching badly, a terrible angle on these pistons here, and it does cause the pistons to warp, it can cause the gears to break, all that kind of stuff. So these are one of the guns where I would suggest you correct your AOE, but when you correct your AOE, if you are having to remove a tooth from back here, you've overcorrected it, and that's the end of it. You never remove a tooth from back here. So I prefer to have 14 tooth racks. So you've got ordinary piston, this is a standard rack. This is no different to most racks you'd normally see in terms of the length of the teeth.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
I prefer to have 1 tooth missing from back here, and it's just easier and neater to buy the racks that have that missing. You can cut that tooth away if you want to, but it's not the neatest thing. I've had to do it on occasion. If I run out of racks that have that tooth already removed, then I do have to remove one, but I always make sure I've got a fuck ton in stock, because I do prefer it when these racks have got that tooth already missing. That is because when the gear comes back, if you've got to correct any kind of AOE, if that is perfect on there, you might find that it's hitting. So it's better to not have that tooth. You can also, if you have to, if you really have to, remove a sliver of material from this side of the rack. But we're not talking about removing the entire tooth, we're talking about taking a sliver away, just enough so that once you've corrected the AOE, this tooth, the first tooth, the pickup tooth in the gear, is just sliding by to grab that tooth there. So let's go back to this piston, which already has that tooth removed. If it's clipping there, it's bad. So you want it to be so it's just missing it. And generally speaking, if it's just missing it, the AOE is going to be bob on. Alright? AOE, don't correct it at the 12 o'clock position. Don't correct it so it's all the fucking way back here and you have to remove a tooth, because that's just idiotic. It's idiotic, there's another way to put it. You'd never do it, it's ridiculous. If your gun has recoil, bolts have recoil. If your gun has recoil, don't short stroke it, because the gun is going to fire slower with recoil regardless. It's going to fire slower. Cycle time, semi-auto response time, that's all going to be slower, so you don't need to remove teeth. If you are running the gun so fast that you are getting the teeth catching, and again I'll give you an explanation of that. So piston goes all the way back, to there, and if the gear can go and turn fast enough forward so that as the piston is returning, it starts to clip teeth here. That is what people call PME, or premature engagement. I wouldn't call it premature engagement. I'd call it you're running your gun too fast. Yes, it's premature engagement, but you are better off seeing it as your gun's going too fast. Now you can reduce that problem by removing teeth from the front. 1 can do it, 2 can do it, 3, 4. Generally speaking, in a gun M4A1 length, you're talking anywhere between 300mm to 363 barrel. Generally speaking, I knock off 3 teeth from the sector gear, which is up here. I normally do 2 from the pickup, 1 from the release, and if the gun is too powerful on an M120, so again we're talking M120 spring, UK power limits, generally speaking that length barrel, M120 spring, 3 teeth off, normally makes it, once the hop is set, the perfect power for the UK. But if it's still too powerful, you can knock off another tooth from the release side, so you've got 4 teeth off. You don't need to knock off teeth from the piston. You don't need to do it. I used to do it because it looked nicer and neater, but just for time available, I've stopped doing it, basically. Little things to make life easier when you're shimming your bevel gear, just because people are always talking about it. That is where you want your gear to be. Now, other things, different pinion shapes make different sounds. There are some pinions that are very wide. There are some that are very long. There are some that are very fat. There are some that are beveled on the bottom here. There are some that are beveled on the top, or tapered. There's loads of different pinion shapes. You might find your motor sounds like trash, no matter what you shim it like, no matter how, doesn't matter, it sounds like shit. If you change out your pinion to a different shape, and I do find my favourite pinion, actually, the shape-wise, is what G&G use. So check out this G&G, you can see the differences. I prefer the G&G approach. Now you can modify your pinion to sound like that. You can see these little cuts at the bottom here. That's nice, that's what I like, There is a way that you can actually do that. If you were to plug in your motor and then pull the trigger so it's spinning, you could literally take a grinder or something and just gently touch it on the edge of here and it will zip off the corners of the teeth. That can modify your pinion. If you fuck it up, you ruin it, all this shit can go inside your motor. Just giving you options. Also, where possible, use a D-shaped pinion. There's O or D. Use D because O, obviously, if you've got a perfectly round hole over a perfectly round shaft, you have to tighten that screw in really tight and whatever else. It's much better to have a D-shaped because obviously it can bite harder. Other shit that people don't tell you. Once you put a pad in, now this is the original cylinder and the original cylinder head that was inside it. So your volume is basically, it's not from there up to this point here. Okay, so your volume, generally speaking, is going to be about there, give or take. So let's just call that, for the sake of argument, 40mm. Once you remove that and change it out to a padded type, we've added material. So that is no longer accurate. That is 5mm. Generally speaking, the pad on there is only sticking out 1mm, so it's probably 2mm. So we're going to knock off 3mm. We make the assumption that it was 4 centimeters, 40mm. That's your volume. That's how much air is going to be going down your barrel. For that reason, because the length of the barrel, that might be perfectly adequate for something like a 250mm in a barrel, but this is not. This is not that length. So I have gone with a full-size cylinder because the barrel length dictates it. If I whomp that back in, like that, we're going to see where the piston releases. Goes back, 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 back. There's your AOE, absolutely perfect. Back, 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 back. And it releases there. That's the point of release. You can see there's your piston head. So what's the width of the piston head? 5.7, but if we go from the actual size of the head, 7.5. I reckon that's 7.4. There it is. I reckon that's 7.4. So I reckon there to there. Again, this is now going to be estimation. 58. Much more volume. Much more volume. If you've got an AEG and it's got an M100 spring in there, generally speaking, that's assumed to be 350 feet per second. All right. In a Bolt, to get that same power, you're gonna want to probably have an M110 because these do leak a bit of air just by design. Now, because of the hop up the customer's using, and because of the lineup of the gun, there is a bit of play in the upper and lower receiver that is almost nothing I can do about. Movement in the upper receiver like this will cause the hop unit to move very slightly from the gearbox. So I'm going to put a slightly bigger spring in here than what I normally would. I'm going to go with an M120. Nozzle in here is 20.9. That is a bit short. That's a bit short. I don't normally change the nozzles in these. I normally stick with a regular nozzle. But I often do change out the hop unit to a ZCI. The hop unit that's in here looks like it might be a ZCI rotary that is the aluminium CNC type. Now, I've already tried changing his hop unit between a plastic rotary. The power is exactly the same no matter what. So I'm thinking that I'm going to have to bring the nozzle length up a little bit. That could be part of the problem. That could also cause misfeeds. So now I've got the issue whereby I might have to use an M120 spring in this nozzle, or can I use the M110 spring and a new nozzle? So, for the sake of argument, let's just, rather than making the gun perform in a way it doesn't want to do, if you can get the same power with a smaller spring using the correct length part, that's the best way of doing it. That's what I'm going to do. So let's fuck that off. And for clarity, at no point am I saying the person who built this originally, normal M4 length nozzle, put the wrong nozzle in there. At no point am I saying that, because I don't have a regular Bolt nozzle to measure, and at the top of my head, I don't remember what the length is. We'll know if I'm wrong because the power will stay the same, or the power will drop, or the gun won't feed properly. And before, there was zero issues with feeding. Whilst I am reassembling, let's go through the pros and cons again of having recoil in your gun. A pro, in my opinion, there are no pros. I like bolts because it's a gimmick and it's got the hardest kick, or it's not a kick, it's not a kick, it's got the hardest reverberation of any of these guns that happen to have some kind of recoil weight in them, right? The cons are that you can't do things to make the gun perform in a way that is different to intended. So, like I said, If you knock teeth off of something, like the piston here, the piston has to go all the way back so that it pushes the rod all the way back, we push the weights all the way back. When the piston goes forward, the whole thing slams forward. When these things go, they don't kick you backwards, they sort of go backwards and pull you forward more. That's kind of how it works. And in this particular case, if you were to short stroke the gears so you can use a tougher spring and then have a snappier semi-auto but keep the rate of fire the same, you know, it means that you're less likely to get overspin and get double taps on semi if you haven't got a MOSFET or anything, little things like that. But you do lose a lot of that recoil. Not all of the recoil, but a lot of the recoil. Now, another negative, I guess, is that the gun itself becomes less accurate. Because if you're shouldering something, in real life, if you could get an AR-15, HK416, whatever, and you were to get one of those that had zero recoil whatsoever, people would be all over it. A recoilless rifle is absolutely perfect. That is exactly what you want. But unfortunately, can't be done. In Airsoft, for some reason, we want to make the guns inherently less accurate by having recoil in them. So having all that recoil causes you to be less accurate, because if there's zero recoil, and I guess it's a benefit of HPA, if there's no blowback, guess what? Benefit of HPA, I guess, then that means that the gun is actually inherently more accurate. It's not banging you around the place, so oopsie doodle. But if you've got a regular old AEG, it's not going to kick you around the place. And I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, I want to do a TM recoil or a fucking Bolt or a KWA with the recoil as a DMR, and it's like, why would you make your life more difficult? Why would you endeavour to have a gun that does all kinds of things to be as accurate as possible, and then you're taking that function and accuracy away? Like, why on earth would you do that? That doesn't make a bit of sense. Doesn't make a bit of sense. And this gearbox is being a bit of a cunt to close. Okay, so that's all set up now. That's ready to go. I'm happy with this unit. The next thing I'm going to go through is basically common sense. It's obvious when you think about it. Why would you go and buy a TM recoil versus a Bolt? Now, if you saw the Bolt I did recently, that was a Daniel Defense Bolt. All the trademarks looked really good. It sounded really good, and it took a little bit of yeet to make it absolutely perfect. But here's my thought process, and here's my question. A TM recoil will set you back £500 plus. Now, I'm not talking about the Scar, and I'm not talking about the AKs, and I'm not talking about the G36, because those, you know, the Scar I think is dog shit personally. I think it's the worst they've done. The AKs, they take some parts that are regular old version 3. The M4s and so forth, the Dev Grus, etc, HK416. My question, if you're going to spend over £500 on one of those, a gun that once you are hopping a .28, the power drops a little bit down to about the 270 mark. The range is pretty good because it's got a completely, it's got a brilliant hot rubber inside it. But you know, things like the maple leaf rubber and all that stuff, you can really get some decent performance out of that gun just by changing the rubber. The barrel as well, you can change it to anything you want to. That's all fine. Most people change barrels and everything. More power to them. I change barrels as well. I understand. I agree. But what I don't understand is why you would spend the £500 on one of those when you could buy a Bolt. Now let's go through the same pros and cons. There's one big difference. The Bolt doesn't have a hold open on empty feature. The KWA does. The KWA has a hold open on feature, and I think of all the guns with a Bolt hold open on empty feature, the KWA is the best. The TM's bolt hold open on empty feature is made up of two very, very soft parts and a very, very soft spring, and it can become problematic. Now, a lot of people go, oh yeah, but I just removed that and it solved the problem. And I went, okay. Take away that issue, take away that part, you've got the exact same gun. So this one here, if you would apply the same paint job to, say, the TM HK416, you've got the same gun. Apart from the bolt hold open and empty feature, you've got the same gun. This one, out the box, is designed to run with an M120 spring. This is designed to run at 400 feet per second. The TM is not designed to run at 400 feet per second. So to make, you buy one of these, let's say 450 quid for one of the top end bolts, versus, let's even be kind about it, 450 quid for a TM recoil, 416 thing, same flavour, looks the same, give it a paint job, same thing. Let's assume it's the same price. This gun doesn't have a bolt hold open and empty feature. The TM does. It stops working quite easily. This gun has a much stronger recoil. There's a downside to that. The downside of that is that it kicks so hard and jolts around so much compared to the TM recoil that it does tend to rattle itself loose. People don't like that these, they call it rattle themselves to death. It's not to death. It's rattle themselves loose. Any gun that you want to keep living for as long as possible, you've got to keep the parts maintained and tightened. So realistically, when I put this back together in a second, I'm going to thread lock the buffer tube, I'm going to thread lock the castle nuts, I'm going to thread lock the screws that go onto it. That's what I'm going to do. And then that problem won't occur. You could do the same to a TM recoil. I've seen them rattle themselves loose. I've seen that happen as well. Here's the difference. Here's the difference. And this just makes sense to me. The recoil on this is more people want the recoil. If they didn't want the recoil, there'd be no sense buying either this or the TM recoil. But let's assume they have. Let's assume the recoil's got nothing to do with it. And let's assume that both have been thread locked and both don't come apart. This, out the box, will be giving you 330, 340 FPS. The TM's going to be giving you 280, 290, maybe 300. This, out the box, will hop anything up to a 3.2 nice and easily. So will the TM. The TM will be very low powered by that point. This will also be low powered by that point. Not as much the TM. The TM takes the same motor as this. It doesn't take the same pistol grip. These, you can put any pistol grip you want on. But the standard bolt has metal insert, so it can't thread out. The TM threads out. The body on this, apart from this piece here, this is particular to just the bolt. And there are many reports of this breaking at the back here. Just like the TM, that also breaks at the back here. This has a completely captive spring guide. And the gearbox cases on these are tough as fuck. The TM doesn't have a captive spring guide. And it does break very, very easily. The cylinder, standard V2. Nozzle, standard V2. Cylinder head, gears, tappet plate. All of these things, standard V2. The TM, particular. And more expensive. To get this gun to the point where you want to run 0.3s and you want it doing the sacred 1.13 dual mark, you could do it on this gun for about 10 quid. TM, hundreds. And the reason is it's designed to break. The design of the TM recoil is perfect. This is less than perfect. The TM recoil design is perfect because it's designed to break. It's designed to break under the pressure of being modified. Mags. Takes any mags you want in this. TM, particular. Hop units. Any ones you like. TM, particular. There are there's a few proprietary parts on this. So lower receiver, stock tube, recoil bits. That's it. Oh, the blowbacky bits on top of it. The TM, everything is proprietary to just that gun. If you said to me, Luke, I want you to just make it so this gun is hopping a 0.32 and it's doing a 0.32 at 1.3 joules, I could say to you, yep, my hourly fee and a tenner for a spring, and technically I don't have to do anything else. The gun is not just going to shit itself, but while it's apart with that hour fee, I could still correct your AOE with a couple of washers. That cost me 10p, and I can thread lock the bits back in so it doesn't rattle itself to death. TM recoil, fuck tons more. Which is a quieter gun to fire? The TM. Which is the better gun? Out the box, leaving it completely standard? Probably a TM. Which one has the best range and accuracy out the box? Probably this one. Which is the better power? Probably this one. And if something breaks, which one will cost you infinitely less to fix? Whether you include a tech into it or not, this. End of. Now, I'm imagining the comments already. My friend had one of those, I had one of those, it ran itself to death so quickly. Yeah. If you had a relay AR, guess what? You've got to look after it. You've got a gas blowback. Guess what? You've got to look after it. We live in the world of fucking Deliveroo and Amazon, where you can go, my Deliveroo was, I ordered my fucking chips and they arrived after 15 minutes and they were very slightly cold, and Deliveroo go, really sorry, have some money back. I ordered this thing on Amazon Prime, it was meant to be delivered by 10 PM the very next day and it arrived at 10:15. Here you go, have some money back. That's the world we fucking live in. That's the fucking world we live in. And I don't like it personally. I'd rather speak to a person. I'd rather they didn't kiss your ass because you're being a fucking wiener. But that's the world we live in. The gun wound itself to death! Well, okay. You've got to maintain it. You do have to maintain things. And if you're paying me an hourly fee to go inside and change the spring, and we're not worrying about the hop unit and the rubber and the barrel and things, just put the spring in. Is the gun going to break instantly? No, because I know to just quickly pop a couple of spaces in there. Technically, you ain't got to re-shim it either. This will last as long as a standard TM recoil. It will. You do have to maintain it. You do have to look after it. But you do have to do that with a TM recoil as well. You do. You should be doing that with every single gun, but we live in the time of fucking HPA Wolverines and Deliveroo and Amazon, and easy is better. I don't have to do anything with it. Okay. If you don't want to do anything with your gun and not maintain it whatsoever and send it off once every couple of years to be maintained basically, go buy a Cena. Simple as. Don't buy anything with recoil, don't buy anything with MOSFETs, don't buy anything that's high speed. If you want something particular like this is the better bet. Go mad in the comments, go fucking nuts. That's the noise it's making because there's no recoil bits in there. Watch this. Oh, the wiring is annoying on both these and the TM recoil. The KWA is a better takedown design. If I had to pick between the Bolt, the KWA, and the TM recoil, I would pick the KWA. But I do prefer the way these look. You heard the noise this makes when you fire it, bang on something? Now in a second we're going to go through the thing that is an absolute fucking pain in the arse. Absolute pain in the arse. But it is the TM recoil as well, so just don't worry about it too much. I think something to bear in mind is that people don't like bashing TM because everyone goes, it's so fucking amazing, it's brilliant. Look at me, I'm an internet celebrity. And I fucking use one of these. And you go, all right, fair enough. People tend to not bash it. But when you side by side the performance, that's when people get a little bit, yeah, mine's a TM, mine's better. Well, mine's got better range and accuracy though, doesn't it? And it costs half the price. Half the fucking price. You ever seen a bolt that's had £1,600 worth of work done to it? Doesn't fucking exist because it's not fucking required. It's an elitist mentality. That sounds good, dude. Mine cost more and that makes it better. Okay. My HK33 didn't cost more because I get things at nice prices and I get given things to test and gifts and things. And that is a nice little benefit of doing what I do and so on and so forth. That is a nice little benefit. I can guarantee my LCT HK33, just the gun and the scope and the motor and the battery cost more than your TM recoil. I fucking guarantee you. Or should do. I didn't pay that. Right, the power is 328 now. Same spring, different nozzle. However, it only feeds every other shot. So now I take the risk. Do I put the old nozzle back in and put a bigger spring? Or do I try and make modifications to optimise? Well, at the risk that I ruin a nozzle and I lose some money, that's my plan. Right, first things first, I very slightly treed it down, mate. First things first, I very slightly trimmed down the hot rubber at the front, which is standard on maple leaf rubbers. There's a puppy going mental out there now, it's going to fuck up my video. Bumski. 319, feeds every time. Okay, so I just achieved feeding with modifications to the hop unit. In case you're wondering, if you want to know, probably do, with a maple leaf hop rubber, it can sit a little bit too far inside your hop unit. So you can see where my screwdriver's going in and out. If the lip is pushing in too far this way, it doesn't let the BBs in properly. So you have to cut a tiny section away, which drops your FPS by about 7 or 8 FPS. But it does mean that the BBs are allowed in perfectly. But if your loading nozzle is longer, you might find it's pushing the BB to the perfect point here and holding it perfectly. But as it goes back, it's retracting not quite far enough to let a BB in. What you can do is you can buzz off a tiny amount of material from the front of your nozzle. You can do. Plastic ones, normally hassle-free if you get it right. But you are talking fractions, you know, just the smallest amount. Don't go nuts and make sure it's straight. Or what you can do, you get into a multi-tool. You see that bit there? That's what I use. And I buzz away material from what is directly behind that section there. What you've got there is basically a right angle. BBs go in and feed. Well, what you can do is if you make it so that it's not a right angle and it's a bit more curved, the BBs can just squeeze into the hop unit perfectly. Now, I knew that mod was likely to work because it was feed, miss, feed, miss, feed, miss. So I knew it would work. So I buzzed off a tiny amount of material inside there. Boom, 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 boom. Perfect. It's like I do this for a living, isn't it? You've got to make sure it's perfectly smooth on the inside, otherwise you do risk the BB scratching, causing massive inaccuracy, but that works out perfectly. Final thing for the bolt then, the annoying stock tube. You need to be able to get these wires, which is why I put them on these clips. Ordinarily I'd use bullet connectors, which makes it easier. I've run out of bullet connectors. I did the normal thing. Go on eBay, order the bullet connectors, UK fucking supplier, it says, Union Jack on it. You go, yeah, I'll have that in a couple of days. Fuck off. That's a lie. Comes from China, still waiting. There are many ways you can try and do this, and each way is very frustrating. Like, really fucking frustrating. This is how I do it. There is a temptation to remove material from here, because the wires have got to go in there, pull through after the stock tube is attached. So the temptation to remove material from here is very, very great. If you get it right, works perfectly. If you don't get it right, you lose the thread on the inside, and then it doesn't go on there properly. Castle nut all the way forward. Stop halfway, thread lock. Remove. And remember to put this cunt on. Okay? Try that again. Thread lock. I'm using 638 because I didn't know this, so the guys at Warhead told me. If you use 638, it dries up the need for oxygen, which is nice. Okay, there we go. That goes on there. This is where it gets really fun. So, positive is on the right, negative's on the left. First of all, I'm going to go to the right gently. Re-grease the rubber. Don't worry, because we're taking it all off. And then try and get that up inside there like that. Again, this is so much easier with bullet connectors. Come on, there you go. There we are. Right, through. There's one. It's a fucking arsehole. Okay, pull through. You'll see there is no snagging to the wires. Everything is mint. There it is, see? Everything is lovely. And then we go to this side. You can do this without the connectors on. It makes it a lot easier. But I want to be able to test the gun straight away without the tube on, get the power right, all that shit. I want to do that without having to keep doing this, which is why I opted to do it this way. Get that back up to the top. Don't snag the wires. Boom, that went straight through. Very gently. Again, make sure the wires are greased. You can see, no damage to the wires whatsoever. It's not the easiest thing to do, but yep, that's starting to move, that's good. I'm going to grease them again because I do not want this binding up. Castle nut, make sure you're using the correct tool as well. Castle nut's on, that's straight. The thread lock will dry over time. And then if I just very quickly brush that off, not a mark to the wires. Lay the wires in the track, you can see the track is going to be in the correct place here. The only thing I don't have is the right fucking size screws for that. What a wanker. I might have one. I might have one. Let's find out. I'm going to put it right in the middle if I do. Yes, I do. Test the circuit again. Any fire? No fire. Oh, I've got two. There we go. Back to the middle one. There we go. One more. Can he find one more? There we go. Lovely. I think if you mix this with all my Bolt videos, you should, hopefully, yeah, be able to put together exactly everything about the Bolt. But I think this is going to be the biggest favour I ever do for a first time Bolt user. As many angles as I can give you. this hook on the outside of the port cover with the gap on top, so the flat surface pressing on the gearbox casing. You can see that moves independently. Tiny spring. Little tiny stupid brass bits. Main spring. You see how that all lines up? I made it really bright so you can see it. That hook on there. That sits around there like that. Yeah, so that goes back and that returns on its own as well. Charging handle, just lay it on top. Grab it there and there. And whatever you do, make sure the little hook goes in the body. And that will just slide on. There we go. $324. So let me see what I can do to have those lock up. You saw what I did there? Half a twist, back out, half a twist, then a little bit, all the way back out. And when you get to about a full twist in, get some grease on that grub screw and keep repeating. If you try and go too hard and too fast, you will definitely wreck either the end of there or even worse, the end of there. And then you can't get it out. Then back in with Mr. Drill. Just enough to leave a dent on that. Then don't try and drill that, you ain't gonna make it. Same as before. There it is, nice little cut there. That is not going inwards with it, it's going sideways onto it. And then lose the grub screw like a fucking idiot. There it is. It's not even tight, just enough to go into that divot. That. See? And now that is on there. That is tight. Charging handle works. There you go. That's how you deal with a bolt, pretty much in its entirety.